before I get on to the question, there's just a couple of things I thought I'd say about what I've done today, because it gives an indication of how far this party has moved and is moving, and also in some ways really just how much the other parties are letting this country down. I started off in Potter Heigham, looking there at large areas of some of the most beautiful country in southern England, and homes, houses, beautiful old churches and farmland, which if the government has its way will be under the sea in a couple of decades' time, because they've decided that it's too expensive to protect the coast of East Anglia anymore, so they'll let the sea take it away. And at the very moment that they're screaming, and rightly so, about a world food crisis, there's just not enough food to go around, they're saying we've got some of the best farmland in the world, and we'll let the sea take it. What would happen to the Dutch if the Dutch government decided we can't bother to defend Holland anymore, sea levels are rising, Holland's sinking, we'll let the sea reclaim Holland? It would disappear. And yet in this modern age, when they've got those huge fantastic diggers of all sorts, most of them nowadays made in Japan and then shipped over here, they tell us that we can't defend our coastline when Dutchmen, and for that matter Englishmen, defended and drained huge areas of the Broads, vast areas of the Wash, and turned them into some of the most fertile soil in this country, made this country richer and stronger by it. They could do it with their bare hands, building dikes, repairing dikes, but we can't do it with all the modern technology at our disposal. What nonsense is this? It's absolutely criminal. It really is. If they're short on manpower, okay, and if you're paying men decent wages, that's expensive. But we've got tens of thousands of perfectly able-bodied scum in the prisons of this country who could be put to work on the kind of electronically controlled chain gangs that they use in the United States of America, so that prison means something, so that prison is hard, so that prison doesn't cost us, and even at the end of it, if you've got young chaps who've ended up in prison because there's nothing worthwhile in their lives, because nobody's treated them seriously at school, because they're white working class kids, they're the bottom of the heap, no one's interested in them, so they've gone off the rails, then isn't there just a chance that rather than leaving them locked up in a cell for 23 hours a day, watching colour TV and playing on PlayStations, provided at our expense, isn't there just a chance that some of them, if you actually take them out there and put them to work, and the ones who are willing to work get extra, and the ones who are willing to work get trained to use the big digger instead of doing it with their hands and a shovel, by the time they come out of prison, there's just a chance that they actually have the wherewithal and the ability and the mentality to go straight. So everybody would win. And that's what we could do. And the technology is there. A couple of years ago I saw a television programme, a news programme, where they were talking about erosion on the east coast, and they're actually talking about the Dunwich area, further down into Suffolk. And they had a marine defences engineering expert from one of Britain's top universities on, and they were saying, but how are we going to defend these cliffs and so on? The sea's eating them away. What are we going to do? Can't be done, it's not working. And they said it's because basically we're asking the wrong question. We're asking how to defend this cliff once the sea's got to it. We shouldn't be doing that. The water's very, very shallow for a mile out. He said we should be reclaiming huge areas of ground like the Dutch did, and then automatically the sea can't get to the cliffs because it's not there anymore. Now you'd have to make allowances for wildlife. You'd have to have areas which you'd protected, which were then wetland and marshland and so on, for birds and wildlife. You couldn't just build a huge concrete wall around the whole lot. But they can at least look at that, and there's engineering experts in British universities saying it would be quite easy to do that and to add to the farmland of this country, to add to the wealth of this country, and to stop the Norfolk Broads becoming a huge inlet of the North Sea. But our government simply won't begin to touch it. Why? Partly because they think in terms of 4 and 5 years. They think to the next general election. And the threat, which is going to destroy vast areas of Norfolk, if nothing's done over the next 10 years, won't strike for another 15, 20 after that. So why are they interested? They'll have got out of Parliament, they'll have had their huge pensions by then, they'll have got themselves on the boards of companies as non-working directors up to their necks in money because of all the connections and the backhanders and the contracts they've approved while they were ministers and so on. So they're all right. They're not worried about what happens to Norfolk in 25 years' time. And that's the problem. We've got a whole governmental system run by people, manned by people, and actually designed to make people think about the next 5 years instead of longer term. But we're nationalists. The point about being a nationalist is not just about race and immigration. It's an important part of it. The point about being a nationalist is that we believe that this whole nation, our people, not people who just happen to have come here, they might be entirely nice, they might be decent, they might be doing us a service, but they're not part of our nation any more than if any of us went to Poland, we wouldn't become Polish. If we went to Nigeria, we wouldn't become Nigerian. We'd be Brits, English, living in Poland and Nigeria, and those would be their nations. But the point about a nationalist is that you see the nation as a big extended family. So as long as people in your family are decent and doing their bit, then you've got a duty to look after them. So someone who's old and frail and sick, you don't regard them as a burden who've got to have their house taken off them to pay for their last few years in care, because if they paid in taxes all their life, they've already paid. And you look after them, not because they're a burden, but because they're your family. You give bright, intelligent youngsters who've got the brains to get to university, you give them free university education instead of enormous debts coming out of their ears, because they're the next generation and the country needs them, but also because a family looks after its bright youngsters and pushes its bright youngsters forward. And a nationalist and someone of the family also thinks about the long term. It's not just about me, it's about my children and my grandchildren. And it's about the values I've inherited, and this family has inherited, from our grandparents and our great-grandparents. So we don't think as nationalists just for this one moment when we happen to be here. We think on the long term, hundreds of years past of our heritage, the people who sweat and labour and blood built this country for us, and hundreds of years into the future, the people who will come after us and will either remember us and our generation with honour and pride and affection because we did worthwhile things, or will curse us for the horrible mess that we left them to inherit.